Thanks so much, Kaya, for joining us on this nice little conversation with some of the leading rock star movers and shakers in the Oxford Net Zero network. Kaya, I got a couple of questions to ask you about who you are and what you do. And my first question is, how did you become involved in this climate work? And could you share something from your journey that we would not otherwise see on your bio or your CV?
Shar, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to catch up with a friend in this way, and also to share kind of to our wider community, like why we're also involved in this work on a personal level. It's also personal for everyone who works at Oxford Net Zero. My journey is not on my bio, although I'm pretty open about it, is that I was I was a climate activist. I was very involved in direct action movements in the Pacific Northwest, in the Keep It in the Ground movement that was resisting fossil fuel infrastructure expansion on what we called the Thin Green Line, which was a kind of resistance movement of people. The Thin Green Line was made of people who were blocking new pipelines and new transport infrastructure from the tar sands in Canada, where you're from, and which would have, exported really dirty fossil fuels, kind of extreme fossil fuels, to China. And so I'm from Seattle, and something that is not on my bio is that, whenever I joined that movement, I was really involved with jail support, and a lot of my friends were getting arrested doing this work. And when we would go to defend defend their actions, their kind of civil disobedient nonviolent action in front of a courtroom, we often had to bring in climate scientists from elsewhere to explain why they felt this urgency and why their previous actions in policy or sort of formal legal advocacy wasn't working. So we had to bring in social movement leaders, social movement scholars who explained how social movements actually do make a faster change or accelerate change. And we also had to demonstrate, we had a burden of proof on the climate science. Now, the climate science was fairly easy to demonstrate, but the social change theory was sort of less familiar to the courtroom and to the jury. So I was a little frustrated with the quality of what we were able to present in terms of evidence on social science and the levers of change in the socioeconomic system. So I decided to become a social scientist, and that's how I got to Oxford, and I'm helping to build this incredible interdisciplinary program with social scientists and physical scientists, and I'm really, really happy to be here.
Wow, what a totally awesome story. And I'm going to encourage people who do want to know more about Kaya's story to definitely check out her more formal bio and her CV, because you can see more of the extraordinary journey that she's been on. But thank you, Kaya, for sharing that sort of more personal side of why you do what you do, how you got involved, and some of the lessons you bring into the work you do today. Where do you get your inspiration, Kaya? Where do you go as a source for the energy that's needed to do this important work?
Man, that is such an important question that, I found myself, I'm a boxer. I box for the Oxford University boxing team, which I started doing just like because I needed an outlet when I was so in the books, my first year of my master's. And I was thinking about that because you really need like a lot of physical energy when you're hitting the bags. And I was a little low on that yesterday. And I was thinking about my mom and my family. My mom read the newspaper to me every single morning since I was a little kid. That was kind of her way of like getting me up out of a bed. I'm not a morning person, and she always had this exciting way of talking about the news clips, or she would be really kind of upset about something. My mom was usually a really positive person, so she would bring out the good news. But my grandma, who actually had pretty severe Alzheimer's at the time and was living with us on and off, ironically, she'd forget to do how to do the dishes, but she always knew she could read the newspaper like way into her dementia, like way further into her dementia than any doctor thought was possible. And she would get like righteously angry. So my mom, over here talking about like the optimistic news, and my grandma would, be yelling about whatever president was in power and how inactive they were on environmental issues, on women's issues, and I really draw that inspiration from those two women on either side of my family.
I love that. You start with the sort of physicality of boxing, and then you move into these like incredible women figures that have influenced you. I think those are such incredible combined sources of inspiration. I encourage people that are listening to just sort of think about what those sources of inspiration are for you. So Kaya, shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the work you're up to. And so I wondered if you could share some of the big questions that you're exploring in the research you're doing with Oxford Net Zero.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. I'm actually just starting my doctorate. I've been working for a year for Oxford Net Zero, doing engagement work and thinking about policies and policy gaps. So I've been doing a lot, as you know, of engagement with the business community about how they're adopting, the leaders in the business community are adopting kind of voluntary standards and how they set their net zero strategies. But what has really emerged from those conversations for me is how much we need regulation and policy incentives to just connect those organizations and those sectors into a system that is changing towards a net zero outcome. And so identifying the gaps in the kind of voluntary private sector has helped me to identify some what we would call at Oxford sensitive intervention points for policymakers to come in and basically help us move a little faster altogether. So a good example of a sensitive intervention point that Oxford researchers have been looking at, I wasn't on this team, so I can't claim any credit, but I just went to the event, so I was really excited to hear. They've found some good evidence that they think a contract for differences policy will help accelerate the transition to hydrogen for the shipping sector. Another example might be the carbon take-back obligation, which would mean that that if you are a fossil fuel company and you're continuing to sell your product and cause significant emissions from the extraction and production of your product, then you have a requirement. This could be true of actually any heavy emitting sector, that the government gives you a requirement to take back, to remove and then store that carbon. And they basically give you a credit, but in this case, a credit would be a kind of a bad thing that you want to get rid of, like a hot potato. And you have to hand that credit off to a credible removal and storage company firm. And maybe that's, it'd be probably better for you if you developed that firm within your operation. A lot of heavy emitting industry have kind of the technology and the capacity to do that. So those are two examples of sensitive intervention points that I'm really excited about, but I'm helping to develop a suite of these sensitive intervention point policies that the government could implement, and then do some research with we're so interdisciplinary with our lawyers, with our technical teams, with our geologists on how those could be implemented. And then my job as a social scientist is to do research on how those could be socialized and to talk to policymakers to think that through.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kaya. It's such exciting work. And I think people can keep on following you through Oxford Net Zero if they want to see sort of where the results of sort of this research is going and stay up to breast with all the things that are going to be going on in this important sort of work you're doing around sensitive intervention points. Can I ask, because I think you've talked about implementation, and one of the things we're keen to explore in these conversations is, if you could imagine, your dream company or dream industry to engage in some of the things that you're developing through your research, which companies or industries would they be and why?
So I think two major buckets of emissions, which, that's kind of how we guide our sense of impact. recently an organization, Rocky Mountain Institute, that I really think is amazing, have just like shifted their entire structure to think about each department, is it tackling a gigaton of carbon? And so I think of kind of similarly, so like there's two major buckets that I think can go quite soon, and we need to be thinking about our impact soon, right? What can we do by 2030, not just 2050? And I think that the road transport can decarbonize like tomorrow if it wants to, and if it has help from the government with the infrastructure. So I'm really excited about the, 2035 mandate to transition to electric vehicles for road transport. I think some fleets are still talking about like saving, using drop-in fuels, transitioning with bridge fuels like natural gas or like hydrogen. But I think we should kind of be saving hydrogen for like the long haul shipping and aviation personally. So what I would say is like road transport companies, you have such an opportunity to write the net zero strategy that is like doable by 2035. Like how cool could that be to see like a significant percentage of our global emissions like done? We've got that covered, sorted. And then I think food and agriculture is one where there's so much natural sequestration potential, but if we can crack the engagement along a supply chain issue, if we can really invest in staffing to build good relationships with those that are basically like growing our food and then sending us our food, then I think that those two areas have a lot of short-term high impact decarbonization potential.
Brilliant. So Kaya, just a couple more quick questions here for you. Where do you think things are going to be going next? If you kind of were to imagine things in 2030, let's say, what do you think is going to be different about the world, and where do you think your research kind of fits into that world?
Yeah, so my hope is that by 2030, we will have experienced a boom like no other in greenhouse gas removal technologies, while at the same time, and this is critical, on parallel and similarly speedy tracks, having innovated on reduction measures on some of the technologies that are just sort of on the cusp. So I think about heating is something that's holding up. We pretty much know how to decarbonize our grid, how to decarbonize electricity, but heating requires a lot of gas, at least in the UK still. And so I think that if we can invest heavily in transitioning to infrastructure like ground source heat pumps, like heat air capture, heat waste recovery, that's like the next horizon for decarbonizing kind of as far as we can. And then to see investment, so that we're like really restoring nature so that it can kind of grow dividends for us while we kind of figure out the hard to abate sectors over the following 20 years. That's my dream. And then I don't know, my research right now fits into all of it. Hopefully I narrow that down by the time I have to deliver a dissertation.
Well, we will be excited to see that, Dr. Axelsson, when that time comes.
No, don't call me that.
Oh, I'm definitely going to call you that. Come on. Maybe we will wait till the official doctoral process is complete,
Yeah.
but I think that's going to be an amazing thing to see on your signature, my friend.
Well, my stepmama says you can't raise your hand and call you a doctor until you're able to help someone on a plane. So I might have to take some CPR courses just so I can pass her test.
Well, I want to be on that, whatever form of transport you're on, if there's ever an emergency, because I think you will know exactly what to do. Okay, we have 1 minute left. I'm going to ask you one last question in sort of a speed round here. If there was any advice that you would give to young people, let's be honest, there's a ton of young people. There's amazing, awesome rock star researchers and academics at Oxford, but there's a ton of young people. What advice would you give to them if they're listening into this?
My advice would be to never stop politely challenging the information that is coming at you. Even the information from your peers or what seems cool. It's a lot easier to criticize what people are doing, but it's a lot harder to come up with solutions. So never stop challenging, but strive towards solutions and think from the perspective of the person who has to actually implement that solution.
I love it. Very, very deep words of wisdom. wonderful energy and just rock star attitude coming from you, Kaya. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, Shar. Really nice to see you.